Okay, okay. So good morning. Once again, we are recorded for the purpose of reviewing this particular video lecture, online virtual lecture by Sir Glen Larot. I don't need to further um, detail his dynamic life
Vital statistic.
on the ground because you have read about him already. So let us hear from Sir Glen Larot.
Thank you, Maman. Good morning, Alnida and Johaira. No? I hope you can hear me. No? Ingon lagi sila nga kining Zoom, ano da plot, online webinar or online mock classes. Muratag nag-spirit of the glass kay we oftentimes say, are you there?
Oh,
So, muratag spirit of the glass. Anyway, as what Ma'am Ann had said that this will be recorded. So I hope that other students and even some of us who will have challenge in our internet connection can still access the resources or the discussion afterwards. No? So once again, thank you for this opportunity, Ma'am Ann, and it's a pleasure to be with you, no, in this class of Sociology 114, and it's also a matter of for me a gratitude, no, for the department to still recognize the some the alumni of the department who have been working elsewhere and in many fields, no, and still being top and connected, no, in one way or another. Anyway, I'll have to share my screen, and then maybe okay, turn off na ko akong video, Ma'am Ann, para dili kayo ko
all
ano.
right, all right.
Thank you.
Okay ra.
Sige. So, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, I was told to share and discuss some of the basics in community organizing. No? So I thought I will be using most of the sharing part, no, based on my personal experience. No? I think in one way or another, I have been doing community organizing right after college. No, that was in 1995. No, I graduated in April, and then fortunately, the following month, I was able to join a non-government organization. My first task or my first job was an organizing staff, organizing fisher folks in Iligan and Lanao del Norte. No? But aside from this is a most of the sharing will be coming from that experience. I also tried to to reflect on those experience based on available literature, you know, academic literature, because this is a formal academic class. So I have to do my best to also give justice to the academic requirement of the subject. No? So that would be my discussion. And based on my conversation with Ma'am Ann, she suggested several objectives or focus of this discussion. No? So I have identified four. One is we have to go back or familiarize ourselves with the history and development of community organizing in the Philippines. No? When and how does community organizing emerge in the Philippines? No? And then the second is what are the basic assumptions of community organizing? The rationale of community organizing. Why are we doing community organizing? The third is what are the available organizing approaches, no, that are available. And then these approaches, I would say at this point that these are not exclusive, meaning to say this is also dynamic. No? These are also dynamic and changes from time to time and depending on the context. No? And I have included in that approaches and examples of issues taken up by social justice and development organizations, just like the organization that I am into right now. No? What are the most issues that we use or that we are working with, wherein community organizing is relevant. No? And then just to introduce also some of the basic skills and behaviors of community organizer. No? This can also be um, used by yourselves. No? If whenever you are thinking, if you are thinking of really pursuing community organizing as a field of expertise or something that you want to specialize on. No? Although I would say generally that in our daily lives, we are always engaged in community organizing, you know, in one way or another, you know, in the different uh, relationship and engagements that we have with everyone. No? So that's the objectives. And this presentation, I think this is not quite long. It is not brief also, I should say, but it will follow generally this outline. No? First, we will discuss, we'll present the history and development of community organizing, the basic assumptions and the approaches, and then the together with the approaches the community organizing issues, no, that development and social justice organizations are considering, and then the skills and behaviors of a community organizer. Organizer. No? Okay, so if uh, if ever there you have some questions or my audio is not so clear, just give me a hint. No? You can either call my attention in any way that you like.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Ann. So first, before discussing further, I think every one of you is already familiar with the definition of a community. No? I think this is part of the basic subject in sociology, or even right now, even in senior high school subjects. No? And there are lots of definitions of communities, of a community. No? Lots of literature is written about it. But as I go through some of the literature, I found out that the word community has two origins. No, one is from a French word, and then the other is a Latin word. No, so according to Google, the pronunciation of the French word is community. No, then communitas for Latin. No, but these two words have similar description or meaning of the word community. No, so it's all one is it's referring to something that are the same. No? For the French word, and for the Latin word, it's common, it's public, shared by all or many. So they have something in common. No? That they are sharing. No? as as one. So, and then from the definitions, as I've said earlier, two common elements were present in every definition. One is the element of a geographical area. So one element is they refer to as the geographic community. No? So this pertains about the certain people gathered in a particular area. No? An example of this right now is we have the barangay, you have the town, we have the city, the province, and so on and so forth. No? So there is a defined geographical area wherein you can see people living together. No? So they refer to that as the geographic community. No? And the second element is the functional community, meaning to say the people shared common interests. No, they shared common function. No? Uh, so meaning to say, these people might live in different geographical area, but they share common interests or functions. No? For example, fisher folks, no, women, students, no, persons with disabilities. Like for example, student of Mindanao State University share the same interest with the students in, let's say, University of the Philippines or De La Salle, no? So, like for example, their common interest might be passing their academic requirements, no? Or learning their particular course, no? So wherever they are, that shared interest exists for all of them, regardless of their geographical area. So that is why they can also be referred to as one community, community of students, community of fisher folks, no? Community of women, no? Because they share the same function. No? This brings me back to my memory of the concept of Jimin Shaft and Giselle Shaft. No? I think that's you have encountered that in your subject also. No? Jimin Shaft referring to a face-to-face interaction of people, and then the Giselle Shaft is the transactional relationship, no, between people. No, I think that transactional type of community is slowly emerging, or is being imminent right now. No, that we are in this online and virtual interaction. No? So, so that's just a review of what community is, and then also it's important in community organizing that we have to understand the elements of a community. No? So what makes up a community? No? So this is beyond this is different from the definition of a state or of a nation, no? According to political science. No, but in community organizing or in community development work, we have to consider. They said at least 10 of these elements. No, the physical aspects. This refers to the physical environment of a certain community or a topography, no, or a location or a size of community, no, how many hectares, how many, what's the topography? Is it hilly, flat, no? And then the infrastructure, no, for example, the roads, is there a mobile connection, internet connection, availability of transportation, and so on and so forth. And then the institutions, no, are there schools, hospitals, no, refers to the different institutions, no, that caters to the needs of the constituents of that community. And then the demographics, no? The composition of the population in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, age, religion, no? And others. No? And then the sources of living, no? What are the main industries that exist in that particular community? How does the people earn, or what are the sources of income of the people? No? And then the patterns of living, or no, the patterns of living or the patterns of settlement. No, is it classified as an urban community, a rural community, or a suburban, no, community? And then the history. No, it's also important to look at and to understand what is the history of that community. How does it emerge? How does it being formed? When was it chartered or instituted into a barangay, into a town, into a city, for example. And then the leadership and management. Uh, this includes who are those elected officials or authorities in the community. And then aside from the elected officials, are there traditional and non-formal leaders that emerge or that governs the community? No, like for example, in it's very common in Moro areas that aside from the barangay captain or the mayor, they have traditional leaders like they call us the sultan, no, as the bai, you know. So this compose the leadership and management of the community, and then the culture, no. What's the spoken and unspoken rules of the community being implemented, no? Sometimes or most often, it's easy for us to grasp what's the written rules of a community, but there are also vital unspoken and unwritten rules in the communities that govern how they act and how they behave, no? And how they interact. No? And then organizations. No? What are the emerging organizations or groups in the community? Like, what are there youth groups, women's groups? Are there groups of different situs? No? And then, or are there even informal groupings among neighbors, no? That can also be considered. Now, the importance and the relevance of this in community organizing is when, obviously, when you go to a community, you have to understand and analyze the different dynamics of these elements for us to employ a more effective and relevant community organizing approaches and techniques later on. So I hope that helps. No? So by that, I I saw this community organizing definition. No? And as I've said, there are lots of definitions of community organizing, but most of them points out to a certain process. No? It is a certain process that lets community identifies their needs and acts on it, and in so doing extends and develops cooperative attitudes and practices. So the keyword here for community organizing is one, uh, it is a process. It means to say it's a dynamic one. It does not necessarily have a beginning and an end. No, it does not necessarily follow a linear or a hierarchical steps. No? And then second, the, the process should be dictated by the community themselves. Meaning to say, they should be the one who will decide or who will identify the reason for being organized. And most of this reason for being organized stems from the need to act on something, the need to act on a certain problem or a certain issue in their community or in their vicinity, no? And on the process of letting them identify that problem and do and act on that problem, it is also an essential component of this definition that these communities or that these constituents or that these people are developed into into a strong and united populace, no? Wherein they will develop this cooperative attitude and practices, meaning doing together, doing things together, no? So that's what community organizing means, no? Uh, so let's now go back, go to the history of community organizing. No, I should say in this instant that the history of community organizing also goes with the history of our country, no, the Philippines. So I think it's interesting to note that whenever we will attend history classes, no, like for example, History One, no, or the history of the Filipino people. No, uh, I don't know if it's still the same course description right now, no? But it's interesting that apart from looking at the political dynamics of the history of the Philippines, community organizing is also taking place already, no? Even at the pre-Spanish era, no? So in the pre-Spanish era, they said that the barangay, no, or they referred to it as the balangay, no? The barangay is already there, acting as the primary political, economic, and socio-cultural institution. No? So what does it mean that the barangay is already existing at that time? Meaning to say, there's already a systematic and organized way of doing things, no? Whether it's political, economic, or socio-cultural. So the people have already a certain system and a certain way of interacting, no, and organizing themselves. And then during this era, the spirit of Damayan and Bayanihan is already evident, no, and I'm sure the spirit of Damayan and Bayanihan is still existing and can be felt up to this date, no. We are very familiar with the Bayanihan system, no. I am sure of that. And then, so that meaning to say that 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 gesture, no, of Damayan and Bayanihan is already a manifestation of an organizing or of an organized community. No? So now we have to note as I go through are how are the focus of community organizing shifted from the different era. No, I hope you can notice that along the way. So then came the Spaniards. No, so from barangays, the Spaniards tried to introduce the pueblos or the towns. So I mean to say they have organized barangays into several groups of barangays, and then there came what is called to be town or the municipio, no, and then it continues up to the present, no, and then another manifestation of community organizing during this era is the emergence of collective efforts to fight or to revolt against the colonizers. No? So, for example, you have the propaganda movement led by the Ilustrados, no? Those who were educated in Europe and in, like just like in Spain, no? Example, Rizal, no? And the other propagandists, the other Ilustrados at the time, no? And then you have the revolution, no? The Katipunan, for example, was formed. So these are product of community organizing, no, during that era. No? The third is the American colonization. So during this era, they said that the organizing focus or the organizing themes of this era is referred to the National Liberation Movement, no? The Philippine Labor Movement, and the formation of Peasants Union. So these are the era. This is the era that these kinds of movements are emerging, no? Against the colonization of the Americans, no? Uh, and then the Japanese occupation uh, followed the American colonization. No? During this era, the Japanese occupation, people's organizations and social welfare activities emerged. No? Because as we can remember, this era is the time of war. No? This is the time of World War II. And then social welfare activities at this time are mostly directed towards giving medical care to the wounded, to the soldiers, to the civilians, no? Caught in the crossfire of the war. No? So people's organizations are emerging at this time. No? And then there also emerged another revolutionary group, the Hok Balahap, no? Hukbo ng Bayan Laban sa Hapon, or the Hooks, no? Which they said that is the beginning of the formation of the Communist Party of the Philippines, no? According to them. No? So that's during the Japanese occupation. And then comes July 4, 1946, no, when the Philippines was declared as an independent from the Americans. No? So this is the post-war era. No? So right after the war, right after 1945, no, during the 1950s and 1960s, this is the Reconstruction period, the rehabilitation period, no? Because most of the uh, the main cities in the country have been destroyed, no? So this is more on physical reconstruction, no? And then the 1960s and 1970s, this was the development decade, no? Uh, Universally or globally, this is the time when development agencies are being formed, no? Led by the United Nations. No? And then because of this, grassroots and mass-based organizing are also emerging so that these organizations, these grassroots organizations, can access to these different development services given by different development agencies at this time. No? The 1970s and 1980s is the participatory development decade. No? I mean to say, engaging local population and development projects is a major intervention here in community organizing. No? But this was disrupted during the declaration of martial law in 1972. No? So with the declaration of martial law in 1972, many members of the developmental organizations who have emerged starting 1960s until 1970s have been arrested or have been declared insurgents. So that's why these organizations were disbanded. No, some organizations went underground. No, so the only organization here that can engage in organizing and that has a less suspicion of being an insurgent is the church-based organizations. So that is why During this time, if you are familiar with the urban and rural missionaries of the Philippines, task force detainees of the Philippines, these organizations are still present at this moment. No? So these are the outputs of the church-based organizing engagement during the time of martial law. No? So they are doing organizing work, no, amidst the they say the martial law and the suppression of and the repression, no, of the political expression of the people. No? And then 1980s and 1990s, socio-economic development decade, no? We are familiar with the people power revolution, no? At this time, when Marcos was, say, defeated during the election, then and Cory Aquino came into power, and then of course, because martial is already lifted, no? Most of those NGO workers who have been going underground and being disbanded re-emerge, no, and then reformed themselves, reorganized themselves. So this is the peak of the NGO work. No, we have observed even among ourselves that during this era, lots of NGOs, non-government organizations have emerged, and one of their basic function is to do community organizing, no? Particularly related to socio-economic development. No? The 1990s to 2000s, this is a sustainable development decade. No? This is the time when the issues on gender development, no, environmental management, resource management, social welfare, and issues came into uh, popularity. No? And then 2000 onwards, I think you're all already conscious on this era, no? And 2000 onwards, this is the era they said that as a social responsibility era, no? This is the emergence of the creative engagement and partnership between public and private partnership, for example. No? This is the era wherein the concept of holistic sustainable development emerged. No? So this is important to note, no, the social responsibility era, because in this strengthen, no, this strengthen some of the concepts and approaches to community organizing. No? So that's how community organizing evolved and manifested and being so dynamic in the different era, no, uh, in our country. No? So with that, uh, from the pre-Spanish era until at present, no, they have reflected or harvested several assumptions of community organizing. No? One is communities can develop capacity to deal with their own problems. Meaning to say, uh, if there is a problem in a particular community and the people within that community are made aware of that particular problem and they agree on that particular problem, they too have the inherent capacity and strength to solve and to act on that problem for its necessary resolution. No? So I mean to say, this is recognizing the strength and the capacity within the communities themselves. Second assumption is that the change and improvement of a community is a responsibility of the individuals and the community as a whole. No? So if the community has a strength, it just follows that each of the individual members of the community should use this strength within them and should be responsible enough to use this strength in order to create a change in their community. No? So this is related to what I've mentioned earlier about the social responsibility era, no, at present. No? The third assumption is that individual self-realization is uh, crucially related to general community improvement. Then to say, we sometimes observe, or we oftentimes observe in a community that there are certain classes, socioeconomic classes in a particular community, and that most often there's a huge gap between, for example, the rich and the poor in a particular community, But most often also these poor communities would always say that uh, he or she cannot is being in or influenced, by the situation of the rich neighbor for that person to strive hard also to become rich in the future, so this assumption pertains to the, if you want to improve the community, we have to improve the individuals within that community. But if you want to improve the individuals of that community, you have to improve the whole of the community. So that's the reciprocal relationship of this assumption, The fourth assumption is that self-determination means emphasizing local initiative, Community organizing, one of the goal of community organizing, which I will be also talking later, is empowerment of a person or of the community. So in order to empower that person, uh, the initiative, that person's initiative should be cultivated and should be enhanced and should be maximized and emphasized, for that person to be empowered. The fifth assumption is that self-development, self-developed changes versus imposed changes. This means to say that related to the assumption number two, if you want to see change in a particular community, this change should be imposed by the communities themselves, aspiring to change. It's not necessarily being imposed from the outside. So most in my experience, for example, I have always observed that any programs or projects that are being introduced from the outside, it could be from a particular funding agency that is being brought to a particular community. It's just it can sustain it cannot sustain uh, sus- strategically or in a long term, most often the people will just be there just to comply, just to attend, just to participate in particular activity, and then when the project ends, uh, nothing has changed, so there's no impact on that project because that project is being the kind of project is being dictated or being imposed by the outsiders. The communities were not involved in the determination of the solution themselves, The sixth assumption is that local community improvement must, as much as possible, be carried on within the framework of planning for the larger community or the nation. So this is what we call as the holistic approach rather than a fragmented approach. I mean to say, if we plan, for example, for a community organizing in one particular barangay, it is necessary to consider what's the overall, for example, community development plan of the whole municipality. What's the whole development plan of the province, So because you cannot isolate, eventually you cannot isolate the dynamics and the development of a barangay into its larger community. Just like in our intervention of the psychosocial, of the well-being of a person, of an individual person. We do interventions, we do counseling, we do therapeutic activities, but it doesn't end there. No, his or her immediate family should also be involved in the process because that's his larger community. That's his larger community, and eventually he or she will go back to that larger community. So, I mean to say, any intervention for that particular person will be influenced, will be affected by how his or her larger community is also acting. No? So this is what it means by the holistic approach rather than a fragmented approach. No? I hope I am still okay. No. So given that
Okay.
assumption, thank you, Ma'am Ann. What then is the goal of community organizing? No? So there are lots of, it depends on the focus on the specific focus of community organizing of or why are you doing such, no? But it's very common to have three goals of community organizing, no, as far as I can reflect on. One is instilling empowerment on the people. No? So empowerment would mean many things. No? For example, the the power to choose or to decide which problems are to be addressed, which what actions are to be needed are needed. No, the empowerment means also deciding among themselves, represented in special bodies and local special bodies. No, being able to raise their concern freely and safely. No, so that's an example of empowerment. No? So we organize to achieve that kind of of situation in a community. The second would be improve quality of life. No? So this pertains to increasing, for example, increasing family income, increasing access to quality education, increasing the access to quality medical care, health care, no? So and others that related to improving the quality of life of a certain population, no? And then social transformation, no? So this pertains to for example, the social relationships of a certain community, uh, maybe among themselves or between the several or the different institutions that they are engaged with. No, so this talks can about, for example, the social equity issues, social injustice issues, how conflicts are being resolved. No, uh, how neighbors treat each other, no? How elected officials are treating their constituents, no? So if there is some problem or some discontentment in that context, and community organizing is introduced to change that kind of context or that relationship, so that pertains to social transformation goal, no, of community organizing, no? Okay. So approaches in community organizing, no? Uh, I should say that the objective of organizing determines the appropriate approach. I had mentioned previously the goal of community organizing. No? Depends on your objective of doing the organizing. No? So you have to employ different and the appropriate approach also, no, doing community organizing. No? But there are most cases you can use simultaneously or you can employ, you know, one or more, two or more approaches, no, depending on the context and your objective. No, one approach is the specific content objective approach. No, so this is similar to the issue based approach. No, so a community is concerned of a specific reform, a specific needed reform in their community. And because of that, they have to launch a particular program to ensure and to secure that kind of reform. No, I put here an example based on our one of our work in my organization. No, for example, here is the prevalence of torture cases among jail inmates. No, so most often you can hear that, particularly for the persons deprived of liberty or the prisoners, no, popularly known as the prisoners. No, whenever they are detained, no, they are subjected to torture, any forms of torture. So with that cases, we need to see the inmates or the prisoners are complaining about that kind of treatment. So they wanted to prevent that kind of treatment. So that's a particular need that the inmates are emphasizing. So uh, we do community organizing to prevent this kind of treatment, and of course, this community organizing takes place in the different jails in the country. You know? So that's one example. Another approach is the general content objective approach. No, so you are not this is not pertaining to a specific issue, but rather it's more on uh, the the coordination and the orderly development and provision of a of a particular service to a general population. Like for example, the identification and provision of humanitarian support to internally displaced persons. No? So in particularly in my work here in Mindanao, no, this is one of this my focus. No, so the internally displaced persons is that's a one that can be defined as one functional community. No, and they have during evacuations, during conflict, no, they have certain humanitarian supports needed. No? So it's very important that they too are included in the identification and provision of that kind of support. No? So whenever that is absent, whenever the IDPs feel that they are not being consulted or that they are not being included in the identification of humanitarian support, no. So that's why then there there goes the need to organize these IDPs, no, among themselves. No? And the third is the process objective approach. No? So this pertains to how if the IDPs for example, they have already included, no, in the identification of the kind of humanitarian support that they have to receive. No? But in the long run, they have to return to their communities. Rehabilitation programs will be introduced. No? But if they are not included in the process, no, of doing and deciding when can they go back to their communities, what kind of rehabilitation programs are to be introduced, no, they most these IDPs felt that they are disempowered, felt that they are disenfranchised. No? So there's a need to organize themselves right at that moment for them to have a representative, no, for them to have a representative. That representation might be physical representation or their agenda are well represented, no, in decision making process. No? An example of this one is like for example right now in Marawi City they have the buckwheat, no, buckwheat power, no, or the organization of IDPs, no, in different immigration centers, no, because they wanted to participate in the decision making of the Task Force Bangon Marawi rehabilitation programs. No, so that's an example of, and these people are being organized, no, for that purpose. Another approach is the project approach. No, this approach uses a a, a strategy that refers to one particular project intervention. No? An example of this I put here is the formation of self-help groups. No? In one of our community here in Aliusan, North Cotabato, women were organized to form self-help groups. No? And then the self-help groups are doing activities or are aiming to be self-reliant economically. No? So that they can increase their capacity and resiliency whenever conflict and displacements arise, no, in their community. No? So that's a specific project approach. No? So you can go to a community and then introduce a particular project. No? So and then you have to organize, no, that community. The fifth is the political action approach. No, so this approach is most often is being used when the goal is to have a the community will be able to air out their grievances and demands to relevant authorities or to the public. So most often this is addressed to authorities, no, the relevant authorities in the community or to the general public. No? For example, is the when we do lobbying and advocacy for the protection of IDP rights. No? This pertains to the creation of the IDP law. No, so we have to organize uh, certain population, no, to for particular the IDPs, for them to be able to air out their grievances, no, as an IDP to relevant authorities, so that these authorities will formulate such laws needed for their protection. No, so that's the political action approach. No, so as I've said, you can employ two or several approaches, no, depending on the goal of your organization, on the context of the community that you are uh, working with. No, then. So I included also this one, principles in community organizing. This is particularly shared by the International Institute for Rural Reconstruction and the Philippine Business for Social Progress. And as I reflected, I have also encountered or have employed in one way or another this kind of principles in my community organizing work. No, so this number is very classical. No, the Lamar principle: go to the people, live among the people. No, so because you will be organizing the people in the particular community, so you have to go to them. Of course, it might be the literal in a literal sense of going to the people and living among them. No, so but the basic assumption here is that you have to understand and to know how the people are living and their dynamics in the particular community. The second principle is you have to learn, plan, and work with the people. No? So we said earlier that local initiatives should be enhanced and should be cultivated. No, so you have to work with the people in order to achieve that, and you have to learn with them, because we said that the people has the inherent capacity and knowledge, no, of their situation. So you have to learn with them. No, you have to learn their situation, and you have to plan with them. No, because we said that one of the the assumptions that we mentioned is that imposing changes from the outside is ineffective compared to a self-imposed change, no, from the community. No, so the plan should emerge from the people. No, the third principle is that this is very important, no, for community organizing. You start with and build on what the people know. No, so whenever a community organizer goes into a particular barangay or into a particular community, uh, take away the assumption that they know nothing about their problem and they don't know how to solve their problem. You know, take away that kind of assumptions, because the people has the capacity. The fact that they are still there by the time that you came in, they're still amidst the several decades, for example, of that kind of problem that has existed with them, and then they are still there by the time that you came in. No, so they have that certain capacity and resources that made them survive until that moment. No, so you start with what they have, no, and what they are capable of doing, no, with, no. So because you can from that you can definitely say that there's an improvement along the way, no, later on as you do your intervention. Another principle is teach by showing, learn by doing. No? So you teach them something by showing them how to do things, no, and then you learn with them by doing with them. No? And then not a piecemeal but an integrated approach. So we said it this about the integrated approach. No? And then not relief but release. This means to say that when we do community organizing, we say that it's for empowerment, it's for social transformation. No? So it's not just relieving a certain community in one particular issue, but it's relieving them with the several other, releasing them from the several web of problems and issues surrounding them and affecting them. No? Hello?
Hello, Glenn. Okay ra. Naarami.
Okay na? Okay, nawala.
Oh.
Sige. Lara, sige. Kung ibalik na ko.
Sige, sige,
Ay,
sige.
asan na to?
Oo.
How can we stop share? Tara ma'am, nabalik na ma'am.
Oo, nabalik ra.
Sige. Uh, okay, so that's the principles. No? So the last part, just some of the tips maybe no on doing community on becoming a community organizer. No, first they have identified some essential qualities of a community organizer. No? So the aim of a community organizer or community organizing, as we said, that it's for development. No, in many aspects of the lives of a community. No, with that aim in mind, an organizer should have a big eyes for observing. No, so learning by observing or observing the dynamics of the community, observing what is there in the community, big ears for listening because you will be soliciting and you will be facilitating for the identification of problem and actions from the community. So you should listen to them. No? And then a helping hand. No? So whenever they have identified the problem and identified the action, the necessary action, there should be uh, help for them no on how to act on this, how to make the actions feasible and how these actions are to be materialized. No? And then a big foot for walking, literally and metamorphically. I don't know kung na-pronounce ako sakto. Literally, big foot for walking kayo ko literally because in my experience doing community organizing, it is very necessary and it is unavoidable no to go to distant areas, distant situs. You have to walk no for several hours no. You are lucky if there's an available transportation, any kind of transportation, in doing in going to these areas. But at the same time, this means also that you have the ability to walk with the people, no? To the particular change that you wanted to see in their communities, no? To accompany them, no? To accompany them, no? Even beyond your assignment, no? Your period of assignment in a particular community. So I have to leave you also with this suggested attitudes and qualities of community organizer. No, so one, the conviction. No, at first, if you decide to do community organizing work, you should be able to have that conviction and the firm belief. No, that it is something that you wanted to do. No, to go to the people and to determine necessary action for change with them. No, that conviction. No, so it's not necessarily you do community organizing to just a plain job. No, it's not something like that. Then flexibility. No, doing community organizing is, although it's a science for some, but in a practical world, doing community organizing requires you to be flexible and to be innovative. No, depends on the situation that you can that you will be encountering in the community. For example, in my experience, there are instances that you are very prepared to do the meetings. No, you have prepared all the you have familiarized your agenda of the meeting, but when you arrive at the community, no one is around. No, so what will you do? Or you are prepared to do a community orientation, no? With all your electronic audiovisual aids ready, no? But when you arrive at the community, there's no available electric power, no? So, or the venue is not conducive enough to have your kind of orientation that you have prepared for, no? So you have to be flexible. No? Sense of humor, no? They say that sense of humor is a skill, no? Some also say that it is natural or inherent to a person. But there are times that this is very useful in community organizing. No? So we have to remember that you are there to organize because of a certain problem of the community. So that problem most often leads to stress and anxiety or uncomfortable situation among the people, no? Among the people in the community. So injecting some level of humor, no, from time to time when you do your work can help the people to be at ease with their problem, with their situation, no, to be comfortable or to somehow find a relief, no, in their situation, no. So to relieve the tension, no, to reduce conflict, no. But of course, you don't have to make jokes or make fun out of their situation, no. Do not do that, no. Then the courage, no. Uh, because you have to lead the local members of the organization to take real risks and therefore must be unafraid of the consequences, no. So the courage to go to the people, the courage to talk to certain groups of people who might be against your agenda or who might be antagonistic to the kind of solutions that the people are thinking, no. So you have to, and but this doesn't mean that courage means that you have to be violent or you have to fight back, no. Always, no, to those antagonists to your work, no. This just means that you are fearless enough to voice out, to air out what the people wanted to see in their community, no? Then the ability to hear, no. You can hear what the people are saying and what are they reflecting from their words or from their actions, no. So you only don't listen or you hear them by the actual words that came from their mouth, no. But you also have to be able to hear what are uh, the reflections from that words, no. For example, in my experience, you can it's very important to hear if within the group that you are meeting with there are certain tensions within themselves, no. So sometimes a person speaks out and then the others are silent, and then when uh, they will not um, they will not directly say that they don't agree with the person, but you can feel the silence, you can feel the discomfort between the people around you. So uh, that's very crucial to hear that kind of manifestations when you do community organizing. No? Then awareness of their own interests. No, community organizers should understand what they want to get out of a situation. No, what why do you do community organizing, no. What is it for you that you wanted to gain from doing that, no. So that this pertains to among other things avoiding self and conflict of interest later on, no, between you and the communities that you are organizing. The ability to be self-critical, no. uh, don't community organizers or like myself, we don't assume that we know everything. We don't assume that we cannot make mistakes along the way, no. So we should be able to examine ourselves, no. Also, and then what sort of action are necessary to correct that kind of limitations, no? Then willingness to share power, no. We should remember that community organizers most often are not from that community or are outsider of that community, no. So meaning to say, what you are equipped with, what you have learned with from, or what you are expert on, we should be able to share that to the community, no, that you are working with, no? Because in the long run you will go out, you will exit from the community, then at least you have shared your expertise, your power with them, you have transferred your power to them, no. So that's what it means, no, the willingness to share power. So there it goes. Some of my references that you can access online. And then thank you very much. Maman,
Yehey!
thank
Clap
you.
clap pod mo diha, virtual clap kung makakaya mo virtual clap be.